The night was eerily quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the unopened envelope that had arrived earlier that day, an envelope that would change my life forever. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, a storm of emotions churning within me. Something inside told me that once I opened it, there would be no going back. My name is Lisa, and I am about to tell you the story of how my perfect life unraveled before my eyes. A story of deception, betrayal, and a truth so devastating that it shattered the very foundation of my marriage. They say you never really know someone until their mask falls off. I had loved Mark with every fiber of my being, trusted him beyond reason. But trust, as I would soon learn, is a fragile thing, easily given, easily broken. And in my case, it was obliterated. When I first met Mark, he was charming, driven, and full of warmth. Our love story felt like something out of a fairy tale. We met in college, and despite the hardships of young love, we built something strong. He proposed to me on a quiet evening by the lake where we had our first date, and it felt like the beginning of a lifetime of happiness. Our wedding was nothing short of magical, a picturesque ceremony surrounded by family and friends, vows exchanged beneath an arch of white roses. As I looked into Mark's eyes that day, I saw nothing but love and devotion. I believed, with all my heart, that he was my forever. Years passed, and our love deepened. We bought a beautiful house in the suburbs, filled it with memories, laughter, and the occasional disagreements that come with any marriage. When we decided to start a family, it felt like the natural next step. We welcomed 2 children, Emma and James, who became the center of our world. Mark was an incredible father. He was the kind of dad who would stay up all night rocking Emma to sleep when she was colicky, and the kind of man who would dress up as a superhero just to make James laugh. I felt lucky. I felt safe. I had a husband who loved me and children who completed our family. But looking back, I see now that love can sometimes blind you to the truth. I was so secure in our life together that I ignored the little things. The nights he came home later than usual, the business trips that seemed to grow more frequent, the moments when he seemed just a little too distant. It started subtly, like a whisper in the wind. A missed dinner here, a late night there. Mark had always been devoted to our family, never the type to stay out late without calling. But something had shifted. "You've been working late a lot lately," I said one evening as we sat at the dining table. "Is everything okay?" He barely looked up from his plate. "Yeah, just a big project at work. You know how it is." Except, I did know how it was. And I knew my husband. He had never been the kind to overwork himself. If anything, he valued his personal time more than anything. So why the sudden change? Then there were the phone calls. Late at night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, his phone would vibrate on the nightstand. At first, I ignored it. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. "Who's texting you this late?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. Mark tensed slightly before locking his phone. "Just an office joke. Nothing special." Nothing special. That was the first lie. And it wouldn't be the last. The first piece of evidence came by accident. I was folding laundry when a crumpled receipt fell out of his pocket. I smoothed it out, expecting it to be from a restaurant or a gas station. But my breath caught in my throat as I read the words printed on it. A toy store. I stared at the receipt, my mind racing. We didn't have children. So why was my husband shopping at a toy store? A cold, unfamiliar feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. At first, I brushed it off. Mark was an incredibly generous person. Maybe it was a gift for a coworker's child, or a relative I had forgotten about. He had never given me a reason to doubt him, and I wasn't about to start now. But then there were the other strange occurrences. The late-night calls, the secretive behavior. And yet, every time doubt crept into my mind, I pushed it away. Mark had been my rock for years, the love of my life. Cheating? It was unthinkable. Even when I found an unfamiliar lipstick in his car, I convinced myself it belonged to a friend or a colleague. When he started dressing better, wearing new cologne, I told myself he was just trying to impress me. And when he came home with faint perfume on his shirt, I laughed it off. Surely, it was just from a friendly hug at work. "You're being paranoid," I whispered to myself. "Mark loves you. He would never." It wasn't until I found the second receipt that my resolve began to crack. This time, it was for a restaurant I had never heard of, a place completely across town. The date on the receipt was the same night Mark had told me he was working late. Maybe it was a work dinner, I reasoned. But doubt gnawed at me. When I finally checked our shared credit card account, my world tilted on its axis. There it was, a pattern of transactions that didn't make sense. Hotel stays, expensive jewelry I had never received, more toy store purchases. My breath caught as I scrolled through the list, my heart pounding in my chest. Still, I hesitated. There had to be an explanation. Mark was a devoted husband, a wonderful father. The man who had held my hand through labor, who had wiped away my tears when life got tough, he wouldn't betray me. Then, I found the burner phone. It was hidden in the glove compartment of his car, buried beneath insurance papers and an old pair of sunglasses. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The screen was locked, but notifications flashed across it, texts from a name I didn't recognize. I swallowed hard and dialed the number from my own phone. A woman answered. "Hello." I froze. My throat went dry. I could hear a child giggling in the background. "Who is this?" she asked again. I hung up. My entire body was numb. There was no denying it now, my husband had another life, another family. And I was about to confront him with the truth he had so desperately hidden from me. After the shock of finding the burner phone, I knew I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. But I also knew I couldn't confront Mark without undeniable proof. My heart was in turmoil, but my mind was clear. I had to gather evidence, and I had to do it methodically. That night, while Mark was asleep, I went through his phone bill. The numbers repeated themselves, some calls lasting minutes, others much longer. One number stood out. It was the same one I had called earlier, the woman who had answered with a child in the background. The next day, instead of going to work, I drove to the address from one of his credit card receipts. It was a small, cozy cafe on the other side of town. I parked across the street and waited. Minutes turned into an hour, and just when I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, I saw him. Mark walked in, casually dressed, looking relaxed, too relaxed for someone who was supposedly swamped with work. But what made my stomach churn was the woman who joined him. She was younger, beautiful, and the way she smiled at him was intimate. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, my hands trembling. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready for confirmation. But I needed more. For the next week, I tracked his movements. I followed him from work, and every time, he went somewhere unexpected. A playground, a residential neighborhood, a small apartment complex. Each visit lasted an hour or two before he returned home like nothing had happened. I even hired a private investigator, someone who could gather evidence without Mark noticing. And the investigator delivered more than I bargained for. Pictures of Mark entering an apartment, carrying grocery bags, playing with a little girl no older than 5. A girl who looked eerily like my own daughter, Emma. The final blow came when I followed him to a family park one afternoon. I stayed hidden behind a cluster of trees and watched as he lifted the little girl onto his shoulders, laughing. The woman stood beside him, her hand on his arm, a picture-perfect family in the eyes of everyone around them. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just an affair. This was a second life. And I was about to expose it all. The night I decided to confront Mark, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. I had rehearsed my words 1,000 times in my head, but nothing could prepare me for the storm that was about to unfold. I waited for him in the living room, his burner phone, the receipts, and the pictures I had gathered laid out on the coffee table like damning evidence in a courtroom. When he walked in, his usual warm smile faltered the second he saw me sitting there, my arms crossed, my expression unreadable. "Lisa? What's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with feigned confusion. I took a deep breath and held up the burner phone. "I found this in your car." For a split second, his face went pale, but he quickly masked his reaction with a forced chuckle. "That? Oh babe, it's an old work phone. I forgot all about it." I narrowed my eyes, refusing to let him slip away that easily. An old work phone with recent calls and text messages? Messages from a woman? A woman who has a child. He swallowed hard, then forced a laugh. "Lisa, you're overreacting. You always do this. It's just someone from work. I can explain." "Then explain this," I snapped, tossing the stack of photos onto the table. The images of him holding a little girl's hand, him kissing another woman's forehead, him playing the role of a loving father to a child who wasn't ours. His jaw clenched, his fingers twitching at his sides. This isn't what it looks like. I scoffed, shaking my head. Oh really? Because it looks exactly like you have a second family, Mark. He took a step forward, desperation creeping into his voice. Lisa, listen to me. You're misunderstanding everything. She's just someone I was helping out. She needed support and Support. I cut him off, my voice shaking. So you financially support a woman and a child behind my back? You take them to the park? Buy them groceries? Play house while your real family sits at home wondering why their father is always too busy? Mark ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. I never meant to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, so that makes it better? That you didn't mean to betray me? That you didn't mean to lie to me for years? Silence stretched between us, thick with tension. His mouth opened, then closed. He had run out of excuses, out of lies. He knew he was caught. Finally, he exhaled sharply and sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I didn't know how to tell you, he muttered. You didn't know how to tell me? My voice cracked. So you just decided to let me find out like this? To let me suffer, to let me think I was crazy for suspecting something. I never wanted this to happen, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It just happened. I shook my head in disbelief. A second family doesn't just happen, Mark. You built this lie. Brick by brick. And you would have kept it going if I hadn't found out, wouldn't you? He looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw it, the raw guilt, the shame, the realization that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. He didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You disgust me. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away like his touch was poison. Lisa, please. No. My voice was steel now. You don't get to ask for anything from me. Not after this. He sat there, defeated, as I stood, my entire body shaking. I had wanted the truth, and now I had it. But it wasn't just the truth that shattered me. It was the realization that the man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had been a stranger all along. And there was no coming back from this. The days after the confrontation were a blur. The betrayal weighed on me like an anchor, dragging me down into an abyss of despair and rage. But what surprised me the most wasn't Mark's infidelity, it was how people around me reacted to it. You should let it go, Lisa, my mother said gently, sipping her tea as if this was just another minor inconvenience. Men make mistakes. Every marriage has its challenges, one of my so-called friends had the audacity to say. Maybe you should try counseling instead of throwing everything away. I clenched my fists, their words burning into my skin like acid. They didn't understand. They didn't feel the shattering pain of realizing that the man I had devoted my life to had built an entirely separate one behind my back. Mark tried reaching out, apologizing, swearing he would fix things. But his words meant nothing to me now. The weight of his deception had crushed whatever love I had left for him. My nights were sleepless, my thoughts consumed by memories that now felt like lies. I thought about the times we laughed, the way he held me when I cried, the promises he whispered under the stars. All of it, meaningless now. But I had a choice. I could let this break me, or I could rise above it. I wasn't going to be the woman who forgave the unforgivable. I wasn't going to be the woman who allowed herself to be deceived again. And so, I made my decision. But now I have to ask you, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Could you ever forgive a betrayal like this? Or would you walk away and never look back? Let me know in the comments below. I can't wait to hear what you think. My nights were sleepless, my thoughts consumed by memories that now felt like lies. I thought about the times we laughed, the way he held me when I cried, the promises he whispered under the stars. All of it, meaningless now. But I had a choice. I could let this break me, or I could rise above it. I wasn't going to be the woman who forgave the unforgivable. I wasn't going to be the woman who allowed herself to be deceived again. And so, I made my decision. But now I have to ask you, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Could you ever forgive a betrayal like this? Or would you walk away and never look back? Let me know in the comments below. I can't wait to hear what you think.